Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to talk about data catalogs. The promise of metadata is huge, and we have hardly scratched the surface. Anyone following the data governance space is aware of the hypergrowth of its biggest component, data catalogs. But on the flip side, now we have scores of data catalogs. This It Depends series talks about two of the upcoming data catalogs to go deeper into ones that are based on open source technologies. Today, I am honored to have with me Mark Grover. He is the founder of Stemma, and Stemma is based on open source Amundsen catalog from Lyft. So, Mark, why don't you do justice and introduce yourself and tell us about your journey?
Sounds good. Thank you for having me. I'm Mark Grover. I'm co-founder and CEO of Stemma, which is a data catalog focused on building and creating data-informed cultures within the organizations without changing the workflows of analysts and data producers who produce and consume the data. And prior to that, I was at Lyft, where I did a lot of work in enabling Lyft to be data effective, data informed. And prior to that, I was an engineer at Cloudera working on technologies like Spark and Hive and enabling Cloudera's customers to be successful with big data.
That is great. Well, thank you so much. Viewers, I always like talking to the practitioners, people who have battle scars. And Mark is right in that category. He's been dealing with data management and its issues for a long time. So, Mark, the first question I want to ask you is, there's a lot of confusion on what is metadata management. Is there an overlap with data governance or with data ops, even with the entire data management space? How do you see the space of metadata management and data catalog?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Let me start by how I see this space, and I will actually stay away from terms like data governance and data catalogs for a moment, just so we can talk in plain layperson's terms what the problem is. The problem really is that organizations have a lot of data, and a lot of people want to query this data, use this data for decision making. And because of that tension of a lot of data, a lot of people who are relatively new to the organization wanting to query data, you have this sense of lack of trust in data, right? So this problem is generally like, I don't know what data I should use. I don't know if I can trust it. You can take that problem and divide that into further three subproblems. The first problem is, what is the source of truth for X? So I am a data scientist at Lyft. I want to do some ETA modeling and generate a new algorithm for ETAs. I want to know what the current source of truth is so I can compare with the new model and see the difference, right? That's one. The second one is, where is sensitive information, right? So this includes things like, where's my PII, PCI, so on and so forth. And the third one is data quality or data observability. This includes like putting tests on your data and making sure those tests are running in a healthy way every single day, right? And then each of these three problems, you can use a product like Colibra, which will say like, hey, I do this all for you, and they choose to use the term data governance for all of it. Sometimes companies that do just classification, they will have an access control system along with it. And then the access control system that's reading the classification metadata and then doing access control on it calls themselves a data governance system often. So long story short, like for me, data catalogs are a solution to the very first problem, which is, I don't know what data is out there. I don't know what is a source of truth. I don't know who's using it. I don't know what's upstream of it. What is the source? What is the downstream assets from it? And just understanding kind of like a Google search for data and a deeper understanding of where it comes and where it goes is what I call data catalog. That's what Stemma is. That's where I've been spending my energy over the last few years.
I see. So this is good to hear your specific ask of a data catalog is to understand what data I have and describe it. But what are the use cases? So that's one side of the coin, is where you're discovering what data is in my organization. But why would you do it?
Yeah, totally. Use cases are associated with the user. So I think we start with use cases by talking about personas. There are 4 personas to talk about here. The first one is that of a data producer. This person usually has a title like data engineer, but often it can be a product engineer. They're producing data. Could be writing pipelines that are ETL pipelines, could be writing segment events that actually trickle to the data warehouses. Essentially, they are the source of producing the data. Second persona, data analyst. I include data scientists in this, savvy product managers or other savvy business users who are willing to write queries, get their hands dirty with data, consuming it, building insights. That goes in this category. Third is a data enabler. Now, this person can have a formal title like data governance person, or it could be just a head of data or VP of data acting in this role. They care a lot about larger culture of data adoption within the organization. They care about whether my company is data driven, is my catalog getting adopted, are people using data to drive decisions, or is the data high quality? A lot of sort of higher
data literacy, improving data literacy.
Okay. Yeah, exactly. And then the fourth persona is that of a business user who's like, I don't care to know about the nitty-gritty details of tables. I just want you to tell me what is the dashboard where I can see my sales numbers, and I'll go use that dashboard.
I see.
So there are these 4 personas that are interplay with the data catalog. The use case for each of these personas is different. We can dig into that if you like.
I see. Yes, I do want to come back to this when we talk about the product. So, but first I want to just talk about the market overall. So when you were at Lyft, what problems did Lyft have? I've heard you talk about ETA for Lyft, expected time of arrival. There was some, so I'd love to hear what was the problem that you were trying to solve. There's so many data catalogs in the market. Why did Lyft have to go out and build one?
So let me tell you a story. I joined Lyft, and my job was to help data scientists and data analysts at Lyft become more effective with data. Mm-hmm. I remember one of the first user interviews I did at Lyft was with the data scientist in the ETA team. ETA is the time that when you request a ride, it's the time a driver takes to come to your home to pick you up, right? This data scientist was telling me that they did not know what the source of truth for current ETA data was in Lyft's warehouse. And this is surprising to me. Like, you are the data scientist in the ETA team. Of all the people in the company, you should be the one knowing what is the source of truth of current actual ETA in the warehouse. And the problem was, when you open your Lyft apps in Jeep, I say your driver is 2 minutes away. Then what you do is you were like, oh, I'm actually going to Phoenix. And I say, oh, your driver is 7 minutes away. Then you say, I'm going to take a line ride to Phoenix. And then I'm like, oh, your driver is 14 minutes away. Mm-hmm. And eventually your driver shows up 18 minutes later, right? So even in that session, I've measured ETA 4 times at different times of the app. There's one of them that's actual. Often in modeling, you have one model that's showing results to the user on the app. The other model is running as a shadow model on the side, logging data to the warehouse, but it's not ever showing it to the user, right? We may have past models that log data to the warehouse that are no longer active. So all in all, if you looked at a column like ETA, there would be 200 columns that had something to do with ETA, right? So it's obviously not a surprise that this data scientist, poor person who like joined the company 3 months ago, didn't know what the source of truth was. Now, you talked about existing data catalogs, right? Mm-hmm. I was like, sure, this got to be a solved problem, right? And so there are 2 that I evaluated, and those 2 were very focused on process. So the idea of helping this data scientist was that I'll buy this big bulky catalog, I'll establish a data governance team who will then set up and manage, orchestrate the workflows that are needed in order to operate this catalog. But most importantly, I would have to go and establish either a full-time role called a data steward or assign part-time responsibilities to existing users who are already strapped by their current job to go and document this data, right? This column is a source of truth. And a company like Lyft that's growing so fast, like I won't be able to hire all the people in order to do that work. Also, the moment it's documented by hand, it gets out of date the next day because the organization is evolving, right? So that was the primary motivation for me to say the status quo is not going to work because it's very process heavy. And the amount of process and people we would need to curate all the documentation we need is just untenable.
I see. So is that why you then created one from scratch? And what benefits did you like? How is it different from the ones that you looked at? By the way, which ones did you look at?
I looked at Elation and Colibra.
Ah, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
So but who named it Amundsen? Yeah.
Yeah. So the next part of the story is I said, okay, these two products don't seem like the right fit.
Yeah.
What are other companies who are trying to solve this problem doing, right? So I went down, I was in San Francisco at that time, so I went down Highway 101 and
Mhm.
talked to a few companies. Airbnb, Netflix,
Hmm.
and Facebook are the ones that I remember, right? They were all had internal data catalog efforts that were more focused on automation. So I'm parsing out the query logs from a data warehouse. I'm looking at the API of my data analytics tool and connecting the dots. I'm using my team information from my HR system to say like, oh, other people in your team are using this information. And then the tool that resonated a lot with me was an internal tool at Facebook called iData and Airbnb's data portal. And I asked both of those companies, like, would you open source this? I need this right now.
Yeah.
And they had built this in a very custom way for the organization it was built in, and they were incentivized to actually put a whole lot of effort in order to make that available for me.
I see.
And that was the sort of starting point, the genesis of Amundsen, right? As far as the name goes, we had one engineer in the team who had a background in geology and geography.
Mhm.
And we were exploring names, and data discovery was a sort of a verb we associated. Data discovery platform is a verb we associated with them, a noun we associated with Amundsen. We talked about being data catalog, data exploration product. And then this person sort of started brainstorming names of explorers that were out there. And one of the names that came up was Roald Amundsen, the person who was the first person to get to the South Pole and therefore the first person to get to both poles. And we really liked that. We thought it was a clever name for a data exploration product. And we called the product that. In retrospect, it's a name that no one knows how to say, no one knows how to spell. So like there's it's not the best name choice, but it's definitely a clever and a loved name choice at this point.
Yeah. So this is great. Since we talk about names, I want to ask you some more questions about data catalogs in general, but let's change tracks here because Stemma. What is Stemma? Why did you call it Stemma? And let's start with that.
Yeah, Stemma comes from it relates to family tree, and we're essentially focusing a lot on the data tree and seeing what comes from where and using automated information to suggest data that you should be using based on what your teammates are using, based on what's popularly used in the organization. We also wanted to do better and not choose a super hard to say name or super hard to spell name. So Stemma was at the intersection of all that, and I'm really proud of the name choice.
So Stemma is basically meant to convey that there is some ontology or some taxonomy of data. There's some sort of like relationship which needs to be discovered and visualized. Is that the idea?
That's correct.
I see.
It also apparently means crown in Greek, which is something I didn't know at the time, but I've been told.
I see.
By a few
You discover. Yeah. Yeah. So how is Amundsen initially and now Stemma, how does it differentiate from so many other data catalogs that we have in the market?
Yeah, I think it comes down at I'll speak of Stemma first. So it comes down to two things. The first one is a catalog is a technology, right? It's a means to an end. The end usually is a decentralized data-informed culture. And in order to do that, you have to think of a few things, right? One is, who are the users that I want to make data informed? And we talked about those 4 personas. And for example, Stemma has historically focused a lot more on the first three, the data engineer, the data analyst, and the data enabler, right? And less on the business user. And you then you have to then focus on what do I need to do in order to make them informed, which usually involves lowering barrier to entry and sometimes increasing skills, right? Lowering barrier to entry means that you have to meet the users where they are instead of forcing them to learn a new method, right? And that is a place where we invest a lot of time and energy in. And lastly, if you are going to meet the user where they are, you have to provide additional information, context, and clarity about data to these people. Like, this is the most used dashboard in your team, use that, right? In order to do that, it requires you to get information out from existing systems, tribal knowledge into a product. However, a lot of historical products are focused on curation, on process. And the key insight that we had here is that we have enough metadata in the world to then parse your Snowflake query logs, your Looker API, and then connect those dots with the team information to then start suggesting information to you. So we'll never, like, with this, we would never guarantee that this is a source of the truth. You can curate that information, but we can tell you of those 200 columns related to ETA, 180 of them, don't worry about them, because they're either haven't been updated for the last 3 years, nobody else uses them, no analysis has been done on it. Here's the 20, just focus on these 20. And then you can go certify that data and all that other stuff. So that's the kind of line of thinking, like starting from culture, meeting users where they are, and then using existing metadata to lower that time to value. So like you can just shove this information in the face of the user who needs it without requiring 2 years worth of process to get all the metadata you need in order to make them effective and productive.
So are you saying, Mark, that the hallmark of Stemma is this ability to understand the relevance, the usage, rank, prioritize, and then spend 80% of the time on the 20% of data that's really needed and not on the rest? Would you say that is the main advantage?
Yeah. Yes, I would agree with that. And I will add one more thing to it.
Okay.
It is hard for any kind of automation to be effective and on its own. Usually you need a human in the loop. Right. And that human in the loop is often guiding the automation where it's off, right? Now, let me share an example with you. Let's say you are an organization that uses HubSpot, and now you're transitioning to Salesforce. You've got a bunch of dashboards, derived tables that are built on top of this HubSpot data that need to be all migrated over to the Salesforce data. Automation sees HubSpot tables are very commonly used. HubSpot dashboards that have been built on it are very commonly used. But overnight, next week, you're going to make a change. And all of a sudden, like, you're going to have Salesforce to be the very commonly used, right? Automation can't figure out that that's what you're planning to do in a week. And so what you can do is you can nudge automation in that way. You can put a human in the loop and say, this table is going to get deprecated next week. It's going to be replaced by this other table. This dashboard is going to get deprecated next week. It's going to be replaced by this other dashboard. And it starts to sort of use that human in the loop as a signal to push people in the right direction, right? And so by no means, I would say that automation will get us all the way. We need curation. But what we want is we want to provide constructs that are structured for you to curate information that help. Ultimately, the end result is lower time to value. Like, how quickly can an organization that deploys the data catalog become effective with it, get it adopted, and start making culture change with it?
I see. So since we are talking about the product specifics, can we, if you don't mind, can we geek it out for a bit?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So what is the technology behind it? Like how do you do automation, orchestration, machine learning inference? What's your persistence layer? What's your transportation, Kafka? What, if you don't mind, can you give us a view?
So at the holistic perspective, like, Stemma's got 4 pieces. There is a user interface that folks interact with. There is a metadata central store which today is a graph database. There's an Elasticsearch instance for powering search and that Google style, PageRank style algorithm. And then there is a component for ingesting metadata from the various integrations. So like if you're using a data warehouse, it ingests the information schema metadata, it ingests the query logs as well. And then essentially most of this metadata is stored in that graph store today. And that's where a lot of sort of inferencing happens. Like we associate sort of the query logs to decipher what are the tables that are commonly joined. We use the dashboarding tools APIs to bring in information into the central store, and then try to connect that to the tables. Like what are the tables these dashboards are coming from? We track versions of various different stuff to see how data is evolving. And that's actually a constant area of investment for us to see, like, it's pretty easy for a catalog to show a snapshot of the data that is today, but data is always evolving, right? So when was a particular dashboard modified? When was a table's new column added? When was a table running late? All these kinds of things are things that are pretty top of mind for our customers, and enabling them are pretty high priority for us.
I see. So what graph database do you use?
The open source Amundsen, as well as Stemma currently uses Neo4j.
I see. And you said when you ingest data from data warehouses, from reports, what is the ingestion technology?
It's a completely custom in-house technology. We don't use any existing technology for that.
I see. So it's interesting when you said metadata store. So you mentioned that currently we use graph. So seems yeah.
Graph has its ups and downs, is all I'm saying, right? Like if you're traversing the graph, it gives you a lot of performance with as compared to a relational database. However, for queries that can be served by a relational database, you actually miss out on some of the guarantees that are provided by ACID technologies, right? You miss out on versioning information, you miss out on transactions, things of that sort. So for us, it's been an investment in learning more about graph technology, and then considering what's the best for us and our customers long term. And that's why I say currently.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. So it's interesting how you shared the main features and the benefits. Where do you see the data catalog space in, let's say, 3 to 5 years, and what changes do you plan in Stemma?
Yeah, three things that I think are broader than any one particular company, but in line with where the data space is heading. First one is that there's an unbundling of data stack. And historically, these data catalog products have been very bulky, right? You take a data catalog, you take a classification system, and you take the quality system, and you bundle it all together, right? So if you take the example of Calibra, like Calibra's got a catalog, it's got some ways to classify data, and it's also got like OWL DQ for data quality, right? You buy Calibra as a whole platform, right? That's the bundled approach. I think we're moving away as a data community from bundled approaches. You buy Snowflake now, a separate ETL tool, everything's separate. And in general, I feel strongly that buying a suite of products does a disservice to the customer, because the vendor in this case is spreading their attention too thin, and you can't build a product that's deep, that's rich, that's moving fast and progressing in the way that you want it to progress. So one trend I see is this unbundling. That means that you would find separate data quality vendors, separate data classification vendors, and separate data cataloging vendors, right? Second thing I'm seeing is that there has been a lot of work around process in order to get value out of the data catalog. So the time to value for data catalogs historically has been pretty long. That's because, like, you have to invest in data stewards, you have to incentivize them, you have to get the metadata descriptions tags into the catalog to then make it productive for the users who are going to use this catalog, right? And I find that now we are in a space in the industry as technologists that we don't have to rely as much on process, that we get a bunch of metadata automatically figured out, we show it to the right people, you click yes, no, you click certified, deprecated, and you start to build a plethora of knowledge to more structured needs. And that's the change that I see happening. Third, there's a tendency in the space to have users change their behavior, right? In order for me to get to value from data catalog, I have to go to a UI to type some information in, get that information, right? But as an analyst, I hang out in Tableau every day. Like, why is it that I have to then remember to go to a data catalog, separate UI in order to get that information? Why is it that I can't get that in my context, right? Another example, you have conversations on Slack. But why is it that I need to go talk about data on a different UI and ask questions there? Why can't my Slack conversations be integrated with my data catalog? Overall, the theme here is meet users where they are, care a lot about user experience, and make this tool intuitive, easy to use, because that's really the only thing that matters at the end.
Wow, I love it. So basically, I could be in Slack and I should be able to see my metadata information, or in Tableau. Instead of like exiting one tool, going to another tool, I should be able to just go to one tool and see it. Is that the idea?
Yeah, that's right.
I see. So, you know, my research, and I said this in the past, said there are many data access tools. There are Tableaus of the world, then you have data robots of the world, you have IDEs, some people use CLI, some people use a notebook. So there are many ways to access, but I am of this impression that at some point in time, the data catalog will become the central force from which you'll branch off into Slack or into Tableau. So in other words, I see data catalog as having more users than BI tool. Is that a view you'd agree with or not? And I'm good with, I'd love to hear how you see it.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. I also would say that data catalogs have been very unsuccessful in doing that.
Yes. Yes.
You take a traditional data catalog, you find it gets good adoption, usually within a large organization and a small team within a large organization. A team that's responsible for telling regulators that this particular data came through the right pipe and it was not modified along the way, right? So it's usually a very small subset of the organization that gets adopted. And it has really poor penetration amongst data producers like data engineers, data consumers like data analysts. And that's been actually, in my opinion, a pretty big failure of data catalogs in the past. So as I do think there's a huge opportunity for data catalogs to serve data users. You and I use Google every day, and we couldn't live our life without Google. The median data analyst at Lyft, I'll share with you, has access to 100,000 tables in the data warehouse. And just as crazy number of dashboards in their dashboarding system. How is it that you and I use Google every day, but this data analyst doesn't have a Google-like thing that crawls the data, tells them what data they should be using, right? So that's the opportunity it presents. And candidly, it's not clear if we will get there. Like as a CEO, I'm supposed to say, yeah, we'll get there. Like I want to, right? But it takes effort, it takes a lot of intent, it takes education, it takes working with your customers and partners to get there. And that's the hard work we have to do in order to get there. If we do, then we have two classes of users that love us, right? There's our data analysts, and anyone who uses Tableau will use a data catalog just the way they use Tableau every day, right? And then there's data engineers. As you are operating the data, you are making sure it gets delivered on time, making sure it's high quality, making sure it's being migrated from old systems to new systems. You will use data catalog to inform how do you go about it to keep in touch with your users and do that. And then those two combined obviously are larger than Tableau's user base because there are two kinds of personas.
Yeah. I love it. I think you nailed it, because this is the crux of it, because a BI tool is used by the analyst, but a data catalog is used throughout the pipeline, like all data users. So this is interesting. I'm so glad you address the adoption point, because when I talk to many of my clients, what I see is that they've tried data governance once, failed, tried it second time, failed. Now they're on the third iteration, and they don't even want this word to be uttered, data governance, because it just brings back all these memories of past failures. So people are using all kinds of different terms. Is that something that you've seen, other terms that people are using?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Data governance is the way you were describing. Other terms people have started to use to make the space appear a little more modern is data discovery is a common term I see getting used. I think, well, we all have failures. I've had plenty in my life, but one of the questions I ask myself is like, if I fail, what does success look like, right? And in the context of our conversation, like I think there are two most common, I wrote a post on it and I'm happy to share a link to later on. Two most common reasons for data catalog failure are first, that it's a ghost town. You need to invest energy in putting metadata in here. You don't invest the energy, it's empty. No one comes to it because there is no value out of it. Right. The second one is it's bulky, AKA consolidated suite of products. And it just creates fragmentation. So in product management, we have this term called golden path. The golden path is the path a user should take when they are doing a certain action. And the more fragmented your tooling is, you fracture that golden path, right? So most common reasons are ghost town or fragmented golden path, because of which users don't come to the product because they have another product that's overlapping that they prefer to use, right? Most common reasons. But what does success look like if that's the failure, right? Success to me is deep penetration in the user base for them to use the product. And based on my experience, that is 80% of the users. So 80% of your data analysts, 80% of your data engineers should be using this product every week. That's canonical. If you don't have that, you have more work to do. If you have that, then you have other personas that you should go make data informed, right? And that would be your business users and so on.
That is that's really refreshing to hear. This is kind of a unique point, the penetration. We always talk about adoption, but this first time, I've seen penetration, and 80% of data engineers or data analysts or business users should use it is a wonderful sort of quantification of success. So since we're talking about the usage, so I have a question. You mentioned there are 4 types of personas. There are the producers, like engineers, there are the analysts, then there are the enablers, and finally the business consumers. When you approach a prospect, who are you selling to? Because that's a lot of different departments. And what's your target ideal customer?
Yeah. We are selling usually to the heads of data engineering, who are tasked with making data analysts effective, and business users more data informed, and obviously their own teams as they're doing migrations and things of that sort. Our ideal customers are customers that have complexity with data. If you are under a certain size, mostly stable organization in terms of data warehousing, like you probably don't need a full-blown automated data catalog like Stemma, right? You can maybe do away with doing a sprint on documentation, and if that documentation, put that on a wiki page and use that. We find that threshold at the lower end to be a company of about 500 employees, a tech company of about 500 employees, a data team of about 10 people. If you're under that, mostly sort of not crazy growth, don't need a data catalog, and not an ideal, I won't necessarily push Stemma for you. But anyone above that, a product like this makes a lot of sense.
Right.
But different organizations have different mentalities around this. So let me share actually another learning I've had here. There are 2 kinds of organizations I run into. One are the command and control mentality, right? And that is, you will only use data by requesting access to it. and that somebody will have to approve the request to access, and then data is available to you. You shouldn't even know if the data exists prior to that. And the other one is data democratization or data literacy informed, where you're like, you have access to knowledge about data. You know that there is a sensitive data set called demographics information. However, you may not have access to that data, but the fact that the data exists and you can request access to it is okay. You can write documentation, but there's no like central team of 10 people who's only responsible for documenting this data, right? And this is in line. So these are the two kinds of organization. Stemma is a bad fit for the first kind, right? We are more centered on decentralization or data mesh and other terms that are being used in this category. So if you believe that an analyst, a consumer of the data, has rich context about the data that they can add to the data set, and it's not just a team of 10 people who has to approve every single request to addition of documentation, then you are a good fit, right? But if you want every single documentation update to be blessed, approved, you're not a good fit, because I am focused on adoption, right? And if you put a bottleneck right in the middle of adoption, how am I going to help you meet those goals?
Yeah, makes sense. Who are some of your customers and what use cases do they have?
Yeah, so some customers I can talk about publicly. iRobot. Oh man, I should go to the website and look at who the customers are that I can talk about publicly, and I don't want to have a snafu here. So give me 1 second. iRobot, Flexport, Tempo are a few that I just see on the website right now. I'm happy to share about their use cases. We have other companies, larger public organizations in the financial services sector that I can't name, but I'm happy to talk about their use cases as well.
And Flexport has been in news quite a bit because they've done some quite a bit of great work in data mesh space.
Correct. Yeah, Abhi at Flexport has been a big proponent of data mesh and implementing that in the order.
Very nice. That is great. Now, so you talk about Stemma and some of your customers. Amundsen has a pretty impressive list of users, right? Who are they?
Amundsen is used by companies like Instacart, Brex, Asana. It was used by companies like iRobot and Convoy, and these organizations are moving to Stemma as well. So we're seeing some of that change as well.
That is great. So this has been a fascinating look into Stemma and Amundsen. What I would love to do is maybe ask you some questions on some leadership pieces, because I'm very curious that you went from being a hands-on person at Cloudera and then at Lyft into being a CEO, founder. How was that transition? How easy is it or difficult it is? And would you do it again? Like, what do you prefer?
Oh, I don't know if I'm suited to answer those questions. I'm still in very beginning of my journey, and I don't think it will ever end. But if you have specific questions, I'm happy to share my takes on it. But by no means am I expert on this topic.
So let me ask you some specific questions. So now you run a company. How do you grow your company? Hire, find talent, grow your staff, your offices. At the same time, sell to find customers, prospects, partners.
Yeah, there's a lot of personal struggle that goes in this, right? I think this section is more around me as a person, so I'll talk about that. But if that's not the intent, let me know. I find that at the core of having too many things to do comes down to prioritization, and it is really, really hard to prioritize. And I think it's a skill that comes in really handy. And the hardest thing is saying no to something that seems important. And for me, it's a realization that the only way I can get out of this long term is to hire, right? And so with that realization, it's like you wait, and the analogy folks like to use is that of like pebbles and sand. And maybe you've heard this before. I wake up and I want to put my pebbles in my jar first, and then have the sand go on. And honestly, it's hard. Like as a doer, like it's very easy for me to put the sand first because I get a lot of satisfaction, check my to-do list item, right? And it's been a continuous learning for me to like actually pick 2 pebbles for the day, and they're like, okay, let's get these done first. Another challenge is you need maker time to do this stuff, right? Like if I got 30-minute blocks here, like I can't do the pebble stuff because like I need blocks of time. So like intentionally creating that time is pretty important.
I see. So, in our data catalog space lately, we've seen some companies get a huge amount of funding, and it's like money is no object. It seems, what Stemmas. I know you cannot tell us anything confidential, but what's your view, and what are you doing about
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, we raised just under $5 million from Sequoia, and that's all I can say publicly. That was a seed round. And I think money going in the space is actually a great thing. It's a validation of the market. It's a validation that there's like a real problem here that needs to be solved, right? And if anything, we should feel good about that, right? The thing for us is like, it just comes down to like focus, prioritization, like personally, but as a company, working on things that matter, and winning the hearts and minds of people. Like no longer are people buying products simply just because like one side of their brain picks it. Like, you're like, my thing is always like, how can you be genuinely helpful to every person you meet as a representative of the company, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I strongly believe that whether or not the product is right fit,
Yeah.
that depends on the product and the company's needs, and you can't push boulder uphill. But it will do you good over the long term because you're going to get ideas, feedback from these people, a lot of favors over the course of the life of the company.
I see. So, what advice, since you have that great attitude and culture, what advice would you give to listeners about handling, like whether it's data catalog or how do you keep up with the modern data stacks, the bundling, unbundling, and all the changes that we are witnessing these days in our data and analytics space?
Yeah, give me a moment to think. I mean, this is going to sound very meta, right? But I think if the advice has to apply to a broad population of your audience, like it kind of has to be meta. I find that technologists have, by virtue of them being technologists, a huge bias towards cool technology and what they can enable, and not enough bias towards who the users are, what problems they have, why do they care, how many such users exist, how many can I go get them, right?
Yeah.
And if there's one thing I would change about us, one thing I would push the community to think more of is that user mindset, right? And if we did that, I think we would make better micro decisions along the way. Choose technologies, choose processes that would ultimately get adoption. At the end of the day, for any product you bring into the organization, there are only 2 metrics that matter. There's adoption. Do people use this thing? That's the single biggest proxy for usefulness.
Yes.
Right? The second one is in enterprise organizations where you can force people to use a product, right? So adoption on its own doesn't count. An example would be an HR system that's really bad, right? A travel expense booking system that's really bad. We've all used these. I don't have to name them, right? So the second metric to account for that is CSAT, right? And so you ask people a very simple question. Either it's a CSAT question, like how satisfied you are on a scale of, I don't know, 1 to 5, or it's an NPS question, how likely are you to recommend this to a coworker or a friend, right? Those 2 metrics are the only ones that matter. And if you align those 2 metrics to your work, I think it will do wonders for you.
That is great. Well, thank you so much for that. I have one last question. We are almost out of time. Tell us something about you the world doesn't know.
Oh, wow. I'm a dancer. I get a lot of my energy from dancing, although I've not been doing that for the last 2 years for reasons that are obvious to everybody. That's how I met my wife. That's how I sort of started meeting a lot of friends from diverse backgrounds, and I'm grateful for that thing. And so if it wasn't for a random push from a friend in 2011 to go out on a dance class, like I would be a very different person than I am today.
Wow, that is phenomenal. And what kind of dance are we talking about?
Mostly Cuban dancing. So there is a dance called Rueda de Casino, which is essentially Cuban salsa, but it can be done as a partner dance, could be done as a community dance. So it's like actually a circle of friends and that dance together, and it's just a very nice community focused thing.
Where, in which city did you learn?
I learned in Boulder, Colorado. I danced a ton in Toronto, Canada, which is where I moved after that. And then in San Francisco, like I spent a lot of time dancing. And there was a dance school in San Francisco called Rueda con Ritmo, where in the Mission District, where I taught and danced and had a good time. And now I live in the Seattle area. It's a recent transition for me. About a year and a half ago is when I moved here, and I haven't really explored the dance scene. And as you know, the job is also pretty busy, so it's a little hard to explore the dance scene here, but it's something that will stay with me for the rest of the life. It's kind of like riding a bicycle, you never forget it. And
Yeah.
I'm glad it sticks
Been
around.
to Cuba?
I'm sorry?
Have you been to Cuba?
I have been to Cuba. I'm Canadian, so it's
I see. So it's easy.
yeah, when I was there, it was pretty easy to go.
I see. That is great. Wow, I had no idea about that. And you're pretty well traveled. You've lived all over the world.
Not as well traveled as you, Sanjeev. I can probably count the countries that I visited on my two hands, but you can take your hands on your toes and still run out manyfold.
Yes, travel is in my blood. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much, Mark. It was such a pleasure. And I usually, when I do these videos, I'm like listening intently. I'm not writing anything down, but I filled up like half a page in my notebook of all the nuggets that you shared, because you gave some very interesting perspectives that I don't usually get to hear. So I want to thank you for joining us and for being on this show.
Thank you for having me. The pleasure is all mine.
You're welcome. Thank you. Take care. See you.